Let us ponder a curious question. Why is it that so many souls with a deep spiritual sensitivity, a certain inner knowing, this profound capacity for awareness, seem to awaken in family currents that are, shall we say, rather turbulent, in dynamics that churn with discord and what one might call toxicity? A painful beginning. And one is tempted to ask, if the cosmic dance is truly wise, if there is an intelligence weaving through it all, why would it place these delicate spirits in the heart of such a storm? But let us play with another idea. What if this is not a cosmic error? What if the very circumstance you have railed against, the very shadow you have spent a lifetime trying to outrun, is, in fact, the sacred ground of your awakening? Not because suffering itself is noble, but because the most resilient trees often grow from the rockiest soil. You see, we hold a charming notion that spiritual unfolding should be a gentle, pleasant affair. We imagine it arriving through silent retreats or hidden within the pages of wise old books. We picture it in the serene stillness of a garden. And yes, these can be lovely doorways. But the true awakening, the kind that resonates in the very marrow of your being, often emerges from the heart of the fire. It comes through the crucible of difficulty. It arrives when everything you thought you were is stripped away, until all that remains is the silent, unshakable truth of your being. Consider it from this angle. If you were born into a perfectly harmonious family, where kindness was the very air you breathed and love was a river flowing without obstacle, would you ever have a reason to question the nature of the current, to look beneath the surface? Would the need ever arise to cultivate that inner strength, that clarity to see through the grand illusion? It seems unlikely. You would simply float on the gentle tide, unaware that any other reality existed. But a family of discord, a dynamic of confusion, that presents an entirely different kind of gift. It offers you friction. It presents you with riddles, with koans, that the ordinary logical mind cannot possibly solve. It places you in situations where you find you cannot simply play along with the game, because the game itself is so wonderfully and clearly absurd. And in that very friction, in that beautiful impossibility, something deeper begins to stir from its slumber. Let me offer another reflection on this. When a grain of sand slips inside an oyster, it is an intrusion, an irritant. The oyster cannot simply cast it out. So what is the oyster's response? It begins to embrace this intruder, coating it with the luminous essence of its own being. Slowly, patiently, layer by shimmering layer, until the source of its deep irritation is transformed into a radiant pearl, a luminous jewel born from a deep and persistent wound. The irritant becomes the seed of beauty. Your family was the grain of sand in the quiet shell of your being. And so you, in the ebb and flow of this struggle, in the deep currents of this pain, through the long dream of trying to understand the why of their nature, you have been cultivating something precious, something those who drift on placid waters may never come to know. It is wisdom, a deep, resonant wisdom. This is not the wisdom of words on a page, but the knowing that comes from finding your own center in the heart of a storm, when the whole world seems to be in motion. But here, the pattern reveals a deeper secret. This kind of beginning doesn't just create turmoil. It poses a very particular kind of question. It creates a profound curiosity about the nature of love. And this, you see, is the hidden gateway to waking up. Consider that most people simply flow with the current, never questioning what love is. They accept the weather of their childhood as the only weather there is. If the sun was warm, they believe love is warmth. If the winds were cold and distant, they assume that too is the nature of love. They never pause to look at the sky. The pattern is simply lived, unexamined. But when you begin in a storm, you cannot simply accept the weather. The pattern is so clearly out of tune that you cannot play the song. You may try for a time, Many do. But eventually, a deeper rhythm in you resists. A quiet inner knowing says, "No, this is not the music. This is not the true melody of love." And in that moment of turning away, in that refusal to dance to the discordant tune, you have taken the first step out of the dream, because now the journey is yours. You must discover for yourself the nature of this love. You cannot trust the old maps you were given. You cannot rely on the initial programming. You must go inward. You must listen to the silence. You must find what love is when it is not entangled with the need to possess, with the illusion of control, with the endless bargaining of conditions, with all the dust that has settled on the mirror. The purpose was not to suffer, though suffering was a wave in this ocean. It was not to be broken, though you felt the fracture. It was to be invited to awaken, to be compelled to ask, to be guided to look into a depth that most people only ever skim across the surface of. Now, let us be very clear. To say this does not deny that the pain was exquisitely real. This is not to say that what you experienced was a hidden gift, or that you must find gratitude for the harsh winds of your past. To do so would be to miss the music entirely. The ache was real. The fractures were deeply felt. And what unfolded was not, by our measure, right. But reality, you see, plays a different game, unconcerned with our ideas of right and wrong. A tree does not find its strength by being sheltered in a glass house. It finds it in the dance with the wind, in the constant, silent yearning for the light. It finds it by plunging its roots deep into the earth to avoid being swept away. The wind is not cruel. The wind is simply wind. But in its absence, the tree would remain forever frail. Your past was that wind. And you, whether you realize it yet or not, have grown roots that reach into the silent, deep places of the world. Roots that those who live in perpetual calm never need to grow. And in that rootedness, that depth, lies a capacity for a perception that others may never know. Consider for a moment those you know whose childhood was a placid lake, a pleasant voyage, comfortable, with every need met. What is their nature now? This is not a judgment, you understand. But do you not notice a certain lightness? A life lived upon the surface of the water? A gentle inability to feel the darker, deeper currents of existence. They float upon the surface, for the depths have never called to them, and so they can believe. In simple stories, for their own life has been a kind of simple story. But you are different. You can no longer rest in those illusions. You have peeked behind the curtain of the great play. You know that families can be a storm, that parents can be lost in their own dream, that love can be a tangled knot. And while this knowing was born of great pain, it has made you authentic, in a way the perpetually sheltered can never truly be. You have been unburdened of your illusions. And while many spend a lifetime clinging to them, you do not have that particular luxury. You were made to see things as they are, and this very act of seeing things as they are is the quiet beginning of wisdom. It is the first glimmer of waking up. Now, let us turn the mirror slightly and look at something that may feel a little unsettling. Because here is a truth that ripples through time. The storm that shaped you was not born from nothing. It was itself an echo of a storm that came before. They carried wounds because their own parents were wounded, and their parents before them. They carried a wound, for their parents were also wounded. An echo flowing back and back through time. Each generation, a wave passing on the turbulence it inherited from the last. They moved in a dream, knowing no other way. And this river of sorrow flowed, finally, into you. The currents of all those lifetimes, all their unhealed hurts, converged within your being. And then, you were the stillness in the water that said, The tide turns here. You were the one who truly saw the pattern and whispered, "No more. This ripple does not go on. I will not continue this dance." And in this, you find the profound change, the reason the universe awakened in you. If we are to use such a word, not because the ego claims a special prize, but because your spirit was spacious enough to say, "I will be the space for this transformation. I will be the silence in which this echo finally fades." Now, let us consider what this truly means. Your family, with all its chaotic energy, they were not your enemies. They were, in fact, your teachers. Unorthodox teachers, yes, guides who taught through the nature of shadow rather than light. But guides all the same. They held up a mirror to a path not to be taken, showing you the dream from which you must awaken, the deep sleep of not questioning, the mechanical rhythm of simply repeating, the patterns they inherited. And in this perfect display of what is not the way, they invited you to discover what is. They invited you into consciousness. They presented you with a choice, and this, you see, is the profound gift of awareness. So many drift through life, never truly choosing their being. They are simply the roles given to them, like leaves carried by a current, following a script they never once stopped to read. But you were required to choose. To consciously ask, "Who then shall I be?" You had to look into the heart of things and decide for yourself what love truly is. You had to consciously compose the symphony of your values, the dance of your connections, the very structure of the life you would inhabit. Nothing was a given. No map was handed to you. Every step was a choice. And in the very act of choosing, in that beautiful, difficult flow of selection, you awoke. You came into being. You became, in the truest sense, yourself. Not the reflection your family expected to see, not the role society had written for you, but the being you knew, in the silent depths you were. Now, here is a point where the mind can play a little trick on itself. It is the thought that to be awakened is to live in a state of perpetual bliss, of unending peace, to float above it all, detached from the dance. But this is not the awakening you seek. It is merely a different dream, a quiet escape into a silent void. True awakening is to open your eyes. It is to perceive the subtle currents, to recognize the dance of cause and effect, and to see that the story of your family was never a reflection of you. It was always a mirror held up to themselves. It was about their own echoes of pain, their own silent sorrows, an emptiness they could not fill, for they were never shown how. And in the moment you perceive this, not as an idea, but as a felt reality, a profound shift occurs. The fire of anger simply begins to cool, to dissolve like mist in the morning sun, not through an act of will, not because you tell yourself a story about forgiveness, but because the clarity of understanding arises on its own. You see, they were not monsters in your play. They were simply waves, carrying the momentum of a distant storm, acting out the patterns they had inherited. They were dreaming a dream from which no one had ever woken them. Now, does this insight mean you must return to the dance? Of course not. Does it mean you must place your faith in the wave's path? That is not required. Does it mean you must stand in the storm and allow yourself to be weathered? By no means. For to understand the nature of fire is not to place your hand within it, and to have compassion for the river is not to allow it to flood your home. You can see another, with perfect clarity, and still choose to observe its flow from a peaceful distance. You can hold compassion for their inner turmoil, and yet honor the sanctity of your own quiet shore. These two things are not in opposition. They are simply different expressions of a single profound awareness. The one whose eyes are truly open understands this dance. They know that to guard one's own silence is not an act of malice. They see that to draw a line in the sand is not to build a wall of stone. They understand that one can send a blessing on the wind without needing to stand in the path of the storm. And in this realization, a curious and unexpected freedom begins to dawn. A gift from the very soil that seemed so barren. You learn the art of loving without clinging. You discover how to care without being consumed by the fire. You learn to see the human pattern, as it is, without the fog of judgment, for this was the very practice life presented to you. It is a curious paradox that those who grew in gentler gardens often find this lesson more elusive. They may feel the shadow of guilt for drawing a line, or a sense of selfishness for tending to their own inner space. For them, the idea of love can become entangled with endless giving, with weathering any storm for another, with embracing that which diminishes their own light, for this is the story they were told. But you were given a different curriculum. You were shown that true love must also include the beloved who is you, that love requires the drawing of a shore, that its truest expression is sometimes a gentle refusal, that the dance of love at times means to walk a different path, not with a storm in the heart, not with a clenched fist, but with the quiet wisdom of a river knowing this current is not its own. And you, like the river, have the fundamental freedom to seek the sea. This is the soul's maturity. This is the very lesson that many chase through the seasons of a lifetime. And you were invited to this lesson early, for there was no other classroom. The play of your family was a profound course in what love is not. And in seeing the reflection, you came to know the source. Allow me to share a pattern I have noticed in the great tapestry. The souls I have known with the clearest eyes, all of them emerged from the turbulence of a difficult beginning. All of them. And for a long while I pondered this. Why does the pressure of suffering seem to precede the blossoming of awareness? And then it became clear. The suffering is not the point. It is the deep inquiry that the suffering awakens. When the waters of life are calm, you do not question the boat. There is no need. But when the waves rise, when the journey ceases to make conventional sense, when those who were meant to be your harbor become the storm, you begin to ask the real questions. Why this voyage? What is the nature of this water? What is the dream, and what is the dreamer? These inquiries. These are the echoes that call the true self out of hiding. The particular dance of your family urged you to ask these questions from the start. They compelled you to look for a deeper pattern in a play that seemed to have none. They compelled you to find the wellspring of love within, for it did not seem to flow from without. They compelled you to cultivate an inner landscape because the outer world was a bewildering storm. And in cultivating this garden, in turning your gaze inward because the world outside was so loud, you stumbled upon a silence that most never hear. You met the one who was always there, not the character your family wished for you to play, not the mask that society offered you, but the quiet presence that exists beneath the story, beneath the scars, beneath the endless stream of thought. This presence, this true nature, was never absent. But most are never given a reason to look for it. They are not required to dive beneath the waves. They are content to sail upon the surface, playing the part the world has assigned. But you had to go deep, for the surface was a place of great struggle. And in that descent, you discovered the entire ocean. Now, here is the final ripple in this thought. The light you have found is not for you alone. It is, in fact, for the whole world. This is for the weave of your family, even if they never see the pattern you've changed. It is for the river of generations that flowed before you, for in healing your own waters, you clarify the entire stream. And it is for the ocean of those yet to come, because you have stepped out of the recurring tide. You have ended the cyclical dream. You have become the quiet stillness that says, "This restless motion ends in me." This is the heart of what it means to be awake. It is not a game of being better than another. It is not a claim to being special. It is simply being still enough to notice the currents and aware enough to navigate them. and open enough to choose a new course, even when the old one feels like home. Your challenging family was the profound darkness that revealed your own capacity for light. They were the friction that polished the mirror of your true self. They were the dissonant note that urged you to find harmony. And the harmony you found, the light you uncovered, it is not yours alone to keep. So you see, to be born into such a circumstance is a paradoxical gift, not because the dissonance was beautiful, but because it taught you the nature of music. It was the bell that woke you, when you might have dreamt your whole life away. It was the question mark that appeared, when you might have only seen periods. It was the crossroads that emerged, when you might have walked a single, unending line. And now, having walked this path, having sat with the dissonance, having seen by your own inner light, you are living evidence that the pattern is not fate, that the river can find a new way to the sea, that awakening is here. Not despite the struggle, but because of it. This is the secret grace. This is why you were planted in that very soil, not to be choked by it, but to bloom from it, not to be broken by the storm, but to learn the dance of the wind, not to repeat the past, but to release it. And in releasing it, you become utterly new.